At the repatriation desk, Captain Friedrich Adler received the paper that could finally send him home, read the final line, and tore the document into strips before the American clerk could stop him, while hundreds of prisoners waited behind the wire and a sealed ambulance left through the rear gate. Because one missing name had turned his release into a choice between freedom and a secret that someone was already trying to remove from the camp. In February 1946, Captain Friedrich Adler stood inside the administration hut of Camp Hawthorne, where American clerks were preparing the first group of German prisoners for repatriation. After 18 months behind wire, Adler received a stamped release document bearing his photograph, prisoner number, destination, and permission to board the afternoon train. Lieutenant James Cooper instructed him to check the details and sign the final line. Adler read the first page, then compared the attached roster with a handwritten list he carried inside his coat, containing the names of 42 men from his former medical company. One name was absent from the American roster, although the missing man, Sergeant Paul Metz, had slept in barack for the previous night. Adler asked Cooper whether Metz had been moved to the infirmary, but the lieutenant found no transfer order, medical note, or disciplinary entry connected to him. A clerk named Walter Haynes entered with a corrected release schedule and told Cooper that Metz had already departed in an ambulance before dawn. Adler looked through the rear window and saw a sealed medical vehicle approaching the outer gate, while two guards lowered the barrier without checking the passengers. He ran from the hut, crossed the assembly yard, and reached the gate before the ambulance passed through. Haynes followed and ordered the guards to remove Adler, explaining that the vehicle carried tuberculosis patients who could not remain near the departing prisoners. Adler called Metz's name, and 3 heavy knocks answered from inside the vehicle before the engine accelerated. Cooper stopped the ambulance at the second barrier, but Haynes produced a medical authorization signed by the camp doctor and warned that opening the doors could expose everyone nearby. The camp doctor arrived moments later and denied signing the paper. Cooper ordered the ambulance inspected, yet the driver abandoned the cab, climbed through a maintenance opening beside the fence, and disappeared among freight wagons beyond the camp road. Inside the vehicle, guards found no sick prisoners, only 6 empty stretchers, civilian coats, forged travel cards, and Metz lying beneath a canvas sheet with his wrists tied. A deep bruise marked his temple, and his prisoner tag had been removed from his coat. Metz regained consciousness inside the infirmary and said that Haynes had summoned him to the records room before sunrise. Someone struck him from behind after he noticed a railway manifest listing 5 prisoners under unfamiliar names. Cooper searched the administration hut and discovered that the manifest, Metz's identification card, and several release papers had disappeared. Adler returned to the desk, read the final line of his own document again, and saw that he had been assigned the identity number belonging to another man. Haynes reached for the paper and claimed the number was only a typing error. Adler tore the release into narrow strips, dropped them onto the desk, and refused to leave until every man on the roster had been identified correctly. The afternoon train departed without him, while Cooper locked the records office and placed Haynes under guard. Adler's decision ended his immediate chance to return home, but it also exposed a release system capable of sending prisoners beyond the camp under names that did not belong to them. Subscribe for more forgotten German POW stories like this one. Cooper moved the remaining release files into the chapel and ordered 3 clerks to reconstruct the roster from intake photographs, fingerprint cards, and Red Cross records. Adler worked beside them because he recognized the men from his former unit and could identify names copied incorrectly during surrender. The first comparison revealed 8 duplicate numbers and 4 photographs attached to the wrong files. 2 men listed as ordinary infantry soldiers had actually served as drivers for a German intelligence office, while another file belonged to a prisoner who had died 6 months earlier. Haynes denied altering anything and claimed the mistakes came from damaged records arriving from Europe. Cooper opened his desk and found a set of blank release forms hidden beneath the bottom drawer, along with a rubber stamp copied from the district headquarters seal. Before military police could remove him, the chapel lights failed and a window shattered near the evidence table. Someone reached through the darkness, seized a bundle of fingerprint cards, and ran into the cemetery behind the camp. Adler followed the moving shadow between stone markers while Cooper circled toward the road. The thief dropped several cards, climbed over a low wall, and entered a delivery truck waiting beside the kitchen entrance. The truck drove through the service lane before guards could close it. Adler recovered one card from the mud and recognized the photograph of Heinrich Voss, a prisoner officially released 3 weeks earlier but still seen inside Barack 9 the previous evening. Cooper searched the barack and found Voss's bunk occupied by another man using his name. The substitute admitted receiving extra food in exchange for answering roll call, but he refused to identify the person who had arranged the exchange. Metz examined the recovered railway manifest and pointed to a storage code beside every false identity. The code belonged to a warehouse near the river, where camp supplies were transferred onto civilian freight trains. A military police team entered the warehouse that evening and found stacks of prisoner uniforms, altered photographs, and suitcases packed with ration cards. Behind a locked partition, they discovered 2 Germans wearing civilian clothing and an American driver preparing travel papers for them. The driver escaped through the loading bay and released a freight wagon down the sloped track. Cooper moved the police truck from the crossing, while Adler pulled a warehouse worker away before the wagon struck a row of fuel barrels. Inside the driver's abandoned case, investigators found a list of prisoners selected for release under false names. Adler appeared near the bottom, beside an instruction ordering him sent home before he could compare the final roster. The list also showed that Metz had been marked for removal after recognizing one of the disguised prisoners. Cooper realized the ambulance had not been intended to transport a sick man, but to erase the witness before the afternoon inspection. District headquarters suspended all releases from Camp Hawthorne. The escalation trapped hundreds of innocent prisoners inside the camp, while the men using stolen identities gained time to move through civilian rail networks before their documents expired. The suspension produced immediate unrest inside the barracks, where prisoners blamed Adler for losing the first train home. Men who had waited months for release surrounded Barack IV, demanded that he withdraw his accusations, and threatened to destroy the reconstructed roster before another inspection delayed them. Adler carried the working list to the chapel, but a group led by Sergeant Klaus Weber blocked the entrance and seized the folder. Weber announced that the Americans could release them by Barack number rather than name, then moved toward the kitchen furnace with the papers. Metz pulled the fire alarm, forcing guards to open the courtyard while Adler followed Weber through the laundry passage. He recovered the folder beside the furnace, but several pages had already been torn away and passed among prisoners moving in different directions. Cooper restored order by locking the inner gates and searching one barack at a time. The missing pages were recovered from mattresses, food bins, and a rain barrel, except for the section containing the names of 5 prisoners connected to the warehouse. One of those men, Otto Lang, disappeared during the search. Guards found his marked coat beneath a workshop bench and a maintenance uniform missing from an American locker. Lang entered the motor yard disguised as a mechanic and drove an army jeep toward the main gate. When the barrier remained closed, he turned into the infirmary lane and struck a water pipe, flooding the road and blocking the pursuing guards. Adler noticed that Lang was not driving toward the perimeter but toward the records annex, where older intake files remained stored. He crossed through the flooded yard and reached the annex as Lang poured fuel across the wooden floor. Lang lit a match, but Metz entered through a side window and knocked the fuel can away. Adler pulled the intake files through the doorway while Cooper restrained Lang against the wall and guards smothered the small fire. The rescued records identified Lang as an intelligence courier wanted for questioning about missing Allied airmen. His planned release papers carried the name of a dead German farm worker, showing that Haynes's system had been used to move suspects beyond military investigation. Lang offered to identify the American organizers if Cooper restored his false release. Cooper refused, and Lang revealed that a final group of disguised prisoners had already reached a coastal processing center under documents issued from Camp Hawthorne. Headquarters ordered every coastal train searched, but the description covered dozens of men wearing ordinary civilian coats. Adler provided details of scars, accents, and former assignments, allowing investigators to reduce the search to 3 passengers. The suspects were arrested before boarding a ship, yet one carried a telegram stating that Adler's real release record had been destroyed. The major consequence was now permanent, because even after exposing the network, Adler no longer possessed an official file proving his identity or eligibility to return home. The reversal began when Metz examined the strips from Adler's torn release paper, which Cooper had preserved inside an evidence envelope. Along one torn edge, he noticed faint numbers printed beneath the visible prisoner identification. A photographic specialist placed the fragments beneath angled light and revealed an earlier entry erased from the form. The hidden number belonged to Captain Friedrich Adler, while the visible number had been typed over it after someone altered the sheet. Cooper compared the indentation with Haynes's typewriter and found that the replacement number had been added after the official seal was applied. Adler had torn a fraudulent document rather than destroying his only valid release record. Military police searched Haynes's quarters again and discovered a key sewn into the lining of his suitcase. It opened a railway locker containing the genuine release certificates, payment records, and letters from relatives offering money to move selected prisoners ahead of official investigations. The records showed that Haynes had begun by changing departure dates for bribes, then joined former German intelligence officers who needed new identities. The American driver from the warehouse had carried the forged documents between camps and civilian stations. A timetable inside the locker marked one final collection at an abandoned station north of the camp. Cooper allowed the scheduled truck to leave with empty document cases, while military police followed beyond sight. The truck reached the station at dusk, where the escaped driver waited beside Haynes's civilian contact and 2 railway employees. They opened the cases, realized the papers were missing, and attempted to leave on a maintenance engine. Adler identified a German passenger hiding inside the engine cab as Colonel Rainer Vogt, an officer listed as dead after the collapse of Berlin. Vogt had financed the identity network to remove his former staff before Allied investigators connected them to his unit. The maintenance engine began moving, but Cooper boarded from the rear platform while Adler signaled the station operator to redirect it onto a storage line. A locked freight car blocked the end of the track, forcing the driver to stop before reaching the main railway. Military police arrested the group and recovered Adler's complete intake file from Volk's case. The pages included fingerprints, medical records, surrender statements, and the original approval for his repatriation. Haynes admitted altering Adler's number because the captain had memorized the medical company roster and would notice men traveling under the names of dead soldiers. Sending him home early had been intended to remove the only prisoner capable of exposing the substitutions. The major reversal cleared Adler of destroying legitimate release papers and transformed his refusal into the action that preserved the real records. Headquarters restored his status, yet he asked Cooper to delay his departure once more until the remaining false identities had been corrected. Cooper agreed, and Adler entered the chapel carrying the recovered intake file. The prisoners who had blamed him watched clerks place the genuine names beside every photograph, while the men behind the scheme were transported away under their own identities. 3 days later, headquarters approved a new repatriation roster requiring fingerprints, photographs, and signatures from 2 independent clerks. Cooper read every name aloud inside the assembly yard while Adler checked each man against the surviving company list. The first vehicles loaded without trouble, but Metz noticed that one passenger kept his left hand inside his coat during fingerprint inspection. Guards searched him and found a thin rubber copy of another prisoner's print attached to his fingertips. The man identified himself as Ernst Bauer, yet the genuine Bauer stood inside the next line holding an old hospital card. The imposter broke from the table, crossed the baggage yard, and entered a railway mail car waiting beside the platform. Cooper stopped the train while Adler and Metz searched the car from opposite doors. The imposter climbed into a ceiling compartment and pushed a canvas mail sack onto the floor before surrendering. Inside the sack were unused release forms, photographs, and the last payment ledger from Haynes's network. One entry named a district clerk still responsible for approving transfers at 3 nearby camps. Military police arrested the clerk before he reached his office and discovered blank documents prepared for 27 prisoners. His capture ended the final administrative route through which false identities could enter the repatriation system. Cooper returned to Camp Hawthorne with signed confirmation that every connected file had been secured. He handed Adler a newly issued release certificate printed from the recovered original record and asked him to inspect every line. Adler checked the photograph, prisoner number, fingerprints, and destination before signing. He then walked through the departing group and found Metz assigned to a later train because his medical examination remained incomplete. The camp doctor explained that Metz's head injury required another week of observation. Adler placed his luggage beside the platform bench and told Cooper that he would not board while the man whose disappearance exposed the network remained behind, without an officer from their company. Metz argued that Adler had already sacrificed one departure and could not repair every injustice by staying. Adler answered by asking Cooper to place both men on the next verified transport rather than separating them through another exception. Cooper canceled Adler's boarding pass and issued a written delay bearing both signatures. This time, no paper was torn, no identity was hidden, and the change entered the permanent log before the train moved. 1 week later, Adler and Metz stood at the front of the final group. Cooper compared their fingerprints with the original files, opened the gate, and watched them enter the correct carriage under their own names. The irreversible event came when the complete identity archive left for 3 separate repositories, while copies traveled with every repatriated prisoner. Adler carried his release paper inside his coat, knowing that no clerk, payment, missing file, or forged number could replace his name again. At the port, Adler unfolded the release certificate before stepping onto the ship and found the creases where Cooper had placed it inside a fresh envelope. Metz boarded ahead of him, carrying the company roster that had survived the furnace, the annex fire, and the stolen files. Adler waited until the final name was checked, then crossed the gangway without tearing another page. Behind him, the false papers remained sealed as evidence, while the document in his hand no longer offered freedom at another man's expense, but confirmed that both men were leaving as themselves. Most people know how World War II ended. Very few know what happened inside these prison camps. Subscribe for more Untold WWII stories.